Welcome everybody. My name is John Holt. I'm the Technical Director of Incosi UK. Today we're here for a Meet the Author session with our latest Don't Panic guide, Don't Panic, the Absolute Beginner's Guide to Systems Thinking, authored by an old friend of Incosi UK. You might remember from previous chats we've had via Zoom. It's Rob Black from Sellafield. So Rob, how are you today?
I'm great, thanks. Again, thanks for the opportunity, John, to be invited along, and obviously as a precursor to that, for the opportunity to contribute to the body of knowledge within Incosi UK. Hopefully, again, today's useful for all in attendance.
Okay, fabulous. So again, it's the usual format. We'll be asking you questions about the book, what it's all about, your writing style, that kind of stuff. So again, nothing too heavy, no serious technical questions. So first of all, the question I ask everybody, all our authors, regardless of the types of books, is first of all, why and where did the idea come from? So what made you want to write the book in the first place?
Well, I guess at heart, I like making things and creating stuff, and this is a product and a long line of things I've imagined and delivered. But I think more specifically, I'm associated with a project engineering management capability, and we do a lot of education and equipping, development of a CPD program allied to Incosi certification and ASEP, CSEP and whatnot. And obviously undergirding all that we do as systems engineers is systems theory, systems thinking. And really sort of through the COVID years, there seemed to be an explosion of people talking about systems thinking through government, through international bodies, through very professional institutes. And it was my perception, at least, that in Incosi Global and UK, we were quite slender in our addressing of this topic. There was some stuff in the Incosi Handbook version 4, a little bit has been added in version 5. But it was something that interested me, excited me. And I thought probably I should just bring together some of the things that I found myself saying repeatedly to others. And then, hey presto, a proposal went in and it got nodded through. So yeah, it was
it does seem like, as you say, it does seem like almost like finally its time has come for the whole of the systems thinking piece, because we've certainly noticed this as well. Yeah, a lot of government contracts now are coming saying you've got to apply systems thinking, you've got to apply systems engineering, those kinds of things. So there seems to be an increase, I was going to say awareness then. So an increased awareness, if not an increased understanding, I think it's probably fair to say. But it certainly seems to be a hot topic at the moment.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and again is we as systems engineers, perhaps many perhaps even on this call or might listen to it within the systems engineering space, we might graduate from kind of mechanistic approach, and systems thinking sort of takes some of these fundamental concepts and just prompts us to sort of stand back a little bit and presents us with a complement of tools, ideas, approaches that can help us make better decisions and just engage with the inherent complexity and complicated aspects of all that we do, whether in work or beyond work.
So do you see it as being an essential part of the umbrella of systems engineering, or just a nice to have?
Absolutely essential.
Yeah.
For all that we do, we're leading and participating in multidisciplinary endeavors. We're engaging lots of different people of different states of their professional careers, different interests, values, needs, wants, hope streams, different industries, different drivers, and all that gets busy and complex, complicated quite quickly. And what I'll say as well is systems thinking is very much, in terms of Incosi and the profession, it's anchored in the competency model published by Incosi Central. So yeah, recognizing that we can't just attend to our immediate system, but there's always ever a system of systems context, and that we benefit from understanding this sort of plethora of terms and fundamental concepts if we're to do anything right and well. We can perfect the means through systems engineering, but we must not neglect the goal. And I think systems thinking prompts us to be a bit more cognizant of both those dynamics and those aspects.
And I think your other point about there's certainly just sort of a dearth of good, concise information in this area. which you've already mentioned. So that was a driver as well, was it to sort of put your stamp on it and say, well, this is the level? Because quite a few, in fact, the origin of the Don't Panics was basically people saying, and I was guilty of this, here's a massive book on the subject, but actually people want a nice high level introductory guide to things. So is that what you found then, that because there is information on systems thinking, but is it an accessibility thing, do you think?
Yeah, I think what I was finding, there was, we're all on a journey, to coin a phrase, traveling through life, and we pick up things that are inspirational, informative, useful, more or less. So, and I found myself harvesting these things to myself and brokering them to others. But I just didn't feel that necessarily that there was the most effective rendition of that. There are people that are eminently more qualified academically and professionally to speak to systems thinking, and they have done. And the book, as you'll see, replete with references that I particularly like to draw attention to Mike Jackson, who speaks in this field. A great tome, a great work has been written by Mike and others. But again, in terms of us understanding it as an integral competency to systems engineering, or maybe to project management or general management, continuous improvement, whichever domain you come from, you can't be necessarily wading through all that. So again, back to the Don't Panic format, I think it's incumbent on some of us to sort of gather that useful stuff together and just, bend the branches down so others can grab the fruit and begin to eat and enjoy.
Mm. Yeah, and yeah, so I think that's a key part of it, is the accessibility, and particularly with a subject like systems thinking. And as we said, we've seen that expression being used all over the place. Many people now aren't necessarily engineers or have a technical background, but they're actually, we're getting contracts saying you must apply systems thinking, or the number of people I talk to that use it, and then it turns out they've got no idea about systems engineering, but systems thinking is a thing that is, across many disciplines. And so, like you say, even though there's lots of excellent books on the subject, somebody who's not an engineer faced with a big engineering textbook, hundreds of pages, they're never going to read that. It's not, because we've got a far broader market now. So I think, the whole accessibility thing is key. So what can we expect in the book then, Rob? Give us a quick overview of what's in it, what you cover, what you don't cover. You've already mentioned the importance of the competency framework, so maybe a little bit more on that as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think generally speaking, pretty much any presentation relating to systems thinking begins with the context, the concept and the context of complexity. That is to say, and the complexity primer written by Incozy indicates that we tend to call something complex when we don't fully understand it. I know there are more tight academic definitions of complexity and complicated and all these different domains that we work in, but generally speaking, things get busy and messy, and they're always ever moving. People, organizations, processes, information, technology, it's all in a spin, always ever. Just sit still, everybody, let me understand you and address you. And it's just never that way. So complexity is really the context for systems thinking. That plays into, as we've said, we've talked around already, there's a key competency of systems thinking as it pertains to systems engineering. As we dance through the life cycle of any system or project, there are complex decisions that we have to frame, problem opportunities we have to understand, trade, we have to make collective sense of a situation, potential options, framing, and that sort of stuff. So the relevancy then is quite clear there. So what I begin to do then in the book is look at some standard terms. Oftentimes in business and life generally, we can upset one another and not appreciate one another's values and interests because we're speaking a different language. We might be absolutely, it might be literally we're speaking a different language and things are lost in literal translation. Other times we might have different emphases and different perceptions, and so standard terms, understanding, what is a system? What do we mean by value? What's a stakeholder? What is a problem? What's a requirement? So the book sort of works through that, but with practical prompts as derived from standardized terms. Now, John, for example, you could articulate right off the bat, a requirement is, and you could give a definition, and I might say, well, actually, no, I see a requirement as being such and such. But if we, so part of the systems thinking bedrock, if you like, is let's understand some normative terms. Let's consider what they mean for us, and sort of explore those practically, how they can help us understand things better. And then we get to looking at some fundamental concepts. So obviously a bit of elaboration on complexity, how the world's
Yeah.
a connected place, aspects relating to causality, how sometimes you might have an apparent quick fix that gives rise to second or third order impacts that you might delight in or might cause great trouble and pain to others. So the book steps through some of these, begins to explore them. Sometimes then as well, we might get into, oh, I'll just pause on that. One of the fundamentals, I think, relating to systems thinking is if only we are thinking and we're not rendering and communicating, then well, we're kind of lost and not as useful as we need to be. So mapping is addressed in the book. So some key systems mapping techniques. So prompting how you can capture an idea, communicate an idea. And then sometimes there's quite a, should we say, a bounded problem opportunity. And it might just, I'm just going to reach into my systems thinking toolbox. I'm just going to pull out this approach. I'm just going to apply it to this particular thing. But if you've got a multi-million pound or extended program of any significance or whatever, you might have a sort of a protracted series of things to consider and decide. So there's this concept I begin to look at in terms of domain characterization. Where are you? And how will you get to a collective understanding and endpoint? And then obviously then there's aspects relating to competency development, lots of resources signposted. And the book winds up then with some personal reflections from me and some colleagues. Some of them actually dialed in today, so thanks for that. But again, just making observations on our practice over time. What do we think we need to be mindful of and aware of? So hopefully it adds, in totality, it adds to the body of Incosi UK, Incosi Global, but helps people help themselves and just become more aware and follow some of these references and just take on complexity wherever they find it.
And I think that's one of the words that you used in the last thing you said is everything is interconnected or everything's connected to each other. And I think, particularly with my background in modeling, it's very much about making relationships between things so you can understand them. And I think this is such an important concept, and many people are just unaware of it. They've still got this siloed mentality of thinking about things in isolation, whether it's technical things in the system or, like you say, different contexts, different points of view, looking at the same thing,
Yes.
yet interpreting it differently. So how much variation did you find when it came to looking at terms like, you mentioned like stakeholders, for example? There's I found a lot of different variation on that. How did you address that? Did you say, no, this is the definition that we're using? Or, how do you go about that? So give us an example out of your toolbox, as it were.
Yeah, so there are, depending on where we are, perhaps some of you this weekend, you've got plans, you'll go to a dinner party or you'll be going to see friends and family, and you'll use language that's appropriate to that context. But obviously, there is no shortage of content creators, especially now, in the age that we live in. But people, you can Google just about anything and people give you a definition. Oftentimes, it's attached to a particular, and I say this in the most respectful way, it's attached to a proprietary methodology that's impenetrable unless you pay for a particular service or whatever. But some people on this call or listening to this subsequently, they might not even appreciate this. But there's such thing as an international standards body, an organization, and they, across all aspects of life and society, they convene around topical areas such as systems engineering, and they define standardized, or as it's termed, normative terms. So, for example, let me just have a little consider here. So, for example, you might have the definition of a system. So ISO 15288, upon which Incosi bases its certification program, a combination of interacting elements organized to achieve one or more stated purposes. We don't have to think about that. Experts have come together and defined what a system is. So what I do in the book, then I start to just derive from that some practical prompts. Well, if a system is there designed or put together for one or more stated purposes, it inevitably follows that we must ask, what are the purposes that people have?
Yeah.
So that prompts me to then consider where do they, within this context of a system, these interacting parts, who is around and about, who's got any interest in purpose here? And then you can ask derivative questions like, well, how will these purposes be identified, validated, prioritized, actioned, measured? Um, Even questions like, well, um, how is the achievement of these purposes helped or hindered by the way in which the system components are organized or the way that they're interacting presently? And all these are, so suffice it to say, people a lot wiser than me have convened under standards committees, they've defined standard terms, but lest we just look at it as a dictionary, they do actually have
Yeah.
practical utility. And if we'd
Mm.
only pause to sort of just look at what's been written, we might find ourselves thinking and deciding and interacting with one another a little bit more effectively. So that's kind of it. So things like system, stakeholder, you've mentioned, so I'll just
Yeah.
touch on that. Stakeholder, any individual or organization who has a right, share, or claim or interest in a system. So we ask ourselves, who has a right,
Mm.
share, or claim in the concept, development, production, utilization, or support of a system? And if we don't do that, I don't think we'll get sound life cycle concepts. We won't make sound decisions. We won't make sound optioned decisions around our options, and obviously the all our system engineering endeavors will be for naught. So anyway, so that's kind of how those play through.
Yeah. And I think that that's really sort of refreshing to see that explicitly. Yeah, you don't just think about one thing, the system. Yeah, what about the stakeholders? What about the way it's connected? And it's drawing those connections between things.
Mm.
So, in terms of the book itself, then Rob, who should read this and why should they read it?
Well, that's a good. I would naturally, I would say absolutely anybody who identifies as a systems engineer or aspires
Mm.
to be a systems engineer because it's a defined competency
Mm.
of the International Council on Systems Engineering. And I draw the provenance, obviously, of that statement from there. But as I've alluded to already, it's recognized as a key competency by the Chartered Management Institute, by
Yep.
the APM, by the Institute for Continuous Improvement in the public sector,
Yeah.
by the
And
Institute for
I do
Business
know you've
Analysis.
got all these in your background
Yeah,
above you as well. So I mean, just look at the variety of applications and the
exactly.
disciplines, and all these are tied together. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's absolutely relevant. And what I'll say as well is the book touches a little bit on systems leadership.
Mm.
I won't drill into the content there, but that's an emergent term, which is basically if you consider yourself as a captain of souls, if you've got to create clarity and order for other people, then you need this competency in your life. You need to
Yeah.
understand it. If you're going to lead people into battle, so to speak, to define concepts or deliver solutions, then and you're going to be kind of leading the pack and facilitating collaboration in a space, then systems thinking will be your friend and enabler. So definitely,
Mm. Okay, so basically everybody should buy this book. So
absolutely.
toe the company line there. Everybody should buy multiple copies of this book. I should
That's an
say.
affirmative, John. Yes,
Yes,
multiple copies for all you and yours. We've passed Christmas, but it's not too early to sort of
it's never
begin
too
shopping now.
early to think about next Christmas. That's what I say. So coming back to the book again, and this is something I ask all the authors, is about the writing style. So, for example, I tend to write. Most of my books are written with one of my good colleagues, Simon Perry, who and we've got very, very different writing styles. So mine is very much an outpouring of stuff. I tend to write. I say in a single draft. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but I tend to just we plan the books, we sort of model them and say this is what's going to be in it. But I'm very much it's an outpouring. I start at the top and I write all the way down and then just go and edit it. Where Simon's got a very, very different approach where every single section is meticulously planned. And so his drafts tend to come out almost the final one. Mine is the sort of random thoughts of a madman, essentially. So what's your writing style? Do you do everything at once or how much planning goes into it? Well, because
Yeah,
everybody's different.
yeah. So I guess to distinguish, there's kind of the product as you'll
Mm.
see it when you pick it up, and there was a landing point, if you will. The Don't Panic series existed before my contribution, so that was quite helpful for anybody who's not familiar with that. There's an extended series picking out, as John said, of different topics, architecture, interface management, all these different
So,
aspects.
yeah.
MBSc, yes, lots of different
Okay.
topics, but they all follow a convention of basically quite natural language. Generally, most sections opened up with a kind of a leading prompt. Sometimes it's a bit humorous, but it's enough to just sort of get you going. The books tend to follow quite a natural, non-academic style, something that's accessible. So I kind of knew I had to land in that sort of space.
Do you find that natural writing in that way? Because I know some of our authors, particularly if they're used to writing very academic things, that's quite alien to them, and they've had to do a bit of a mindset shift to write in a more accessible, high level way. So is that natural to you to write in that way, or?
Yeah, but yeah, it is because my father of several kids, and also an educator within my business. And it's been said, if you can't explain something to children, you can't.
Yeah.
Perhaps you don't necessarily understand it. Now, I'll qualify that to say, um, if there's anybody of any academic persuasion and qualification, I entirely respect your domain in which you must write and the conventions established there. But for the rest of us, we have to kind of we have to make things comprehensible, and we can't be lost in all that. So it's very natural to me in terms of the educational approach I have in terms of trying to reduce things to their essence. So that was the product. In terms of the process of actually developing the book, I think you've got to start with an interest and a passion around something. For me, that was and a need. If you're only going to just sort of rehearse the thoughts of others, then there's little value to that. So if you've got a passion and there's a space, then that's the first step. And then the process for me, then it looked about, well, I've kind of got a bit like you, John, you've got all these sort of scattered thoughts. Let's create a proverbial mind map. And that becomes the kind of skeletal form for a table of contents. And you start building up a bit of a mind map. And then just in terms of a discipline over a matter of months or whatever, just sort of chipping away at sections, looking for cross references and substantiation of things that I might like to say, but it was as a process. What I will say is it's quite therapeutic to get all of those rattling thoughts down into a final deliverable. Quite rewarding as well.
So do you enjoy writing then? Because I know some very established authors who actually hate writing.
Yeah.
So do you enjoy it? Is it something that you look forward to, or is it something that makes you groan?
Well, I think there are moments out there. The opportunity to be supported through a process, it's validating. That this is a topic that needed to be talked about, and I derived some validation from that, and that was good for me. And again, thanks to all that helped in the process of reviewing a proposal. I even had some informal support of different colleagues, and then obviously in more formal review and publishing. So all that sort of it gives you the sense that it was worth doing, which is kind of the motivation that sort of keeps you going beyond your own internal motivation. That I can't lie, there are moments when you sort of, you're sort of going through and you're thinking, how do I finish this sentence? But I've already used that word, and there's kind of I don't want it to sound like that. But eventually, hard work pays off. And I think just generally in life, there's the thing about nature and nurture. You might be, you might have a creative instinct, but at the end of the day, you have to nurture that, and you have to put the hard yards in and spend the time. And I would encourage anybody who has any experience in any aspect relating to systems engineering, have a word with John and the team there. But your voice can be heard in this format. So again, thanks to John and others for letting me do that. But yeah, it was therapeutic and rewarding, difficult at times, but I'm very satisfied with the product. So thank you.
So one of the things that people often find difficult is probably not the right word, but sort of challenging about writing, particularly a Don't Panic guide, is the length, because we limit the pages to 55 pages. And then you've got to bear in mind we encourage a lot of a lot of diagrams, photographs, pictures, and so on. So actually, in reality, you're probably only looking at just over 40 pages of words. So were there any compromises that you had to make in terms of the content? Because I know a lot of people just said, it's more difficult than writing a 300 or 400 page book, because you've got this big constraint of the page limit. So were you impacted by that at all?
Well, for disclosure, this is my first professional book sort of published. So I have read many books that are of great length and substance and enjoyed them, and they keep giving. Not least, for example, the collaborative products of the Incozy Handbook or other books by yourself and others, John. But for me, this was, it felt right. It felt right for the
Okay.
topic. I'd like to meet somebody who could just churn out 300 pages.
Mm.
For me, I think I did stretch the review team. They obliged me. I went slightly beyond the limit, but so there's a little bit of interplay on that. But no, I think generally speaking, not to sort of blow Incozy's trumpet, but this format is very accessible and useful. And if we can't say it in as few words as possible, then what are we doing?
Mm. And I think that's it, isn't it? And it's like me. I don't think any film should be longer than 90 minutes. And for some reason, now you see films that are 3.5 hours long. And you just go that if you can't tell your story in 90 minutes, mate, I'm not watching it, kind of thing. So I think that there is kind of a skill and an art to getting it down to that. So was there anything that you wanted to cover in the book that you didn't, or?
No, no, I don't think so. I mean, what I entirely respect is, I alluded to before, for example, like the skeletal form of the scope,
Mm,
kind of like I wanted to cover. I know that there are people who are eminently more qualified in terms of breadth or depth to take any of those particular nodes, explode them, and write extended series, and they have.
yeah.
Um, so I felt my job was, I didn't feel any threat or challenge. I just knew I had to cover the breadth in enough. I don't think there was anything particularly that I had to keep out. And again, the review team and editorial team were obliging as well. So no, I don't feel like I've been truncated anyway.
Okay, good. And did you find yourself, I mean, you mentioned the Incozy competency framework, for example, and you said that the two are very closely coupled. Did you ever find yourself sort of constrained by that? Did you feel sort of, how much did you feel it was an obligation to work very closely with that? Or is it just a passing reference?
Mhm.
How do you feel about that?
Yes. So maybe if I'll address that, the answer to that, just at a slightly higher level.
Mm,
As with many things in life, there are lots of different perceptions as to what the topic at hand is, or what the key points and emphasis should be, and people give their contextualized interpretation of all manner of things. And so competency, systems thinking competency, or even systems
mm,
engineering, or any matter for that regard, they'll be variously interpreted. So approaching this book, I'm quite mindful that there might be some people out there who say, no, systems engineering is this, or systems thinking is
yeah.
that, or complexity is the other. Um, I think one of the things that Mike Jackson et al. Promote is this critical systems thinking. That is to
Mm,
say that they're horses for courses, and there are different
mm,
concepts, different tools, different standards, different methods, depending on where we're at. Um, and similarly, when it comes to competency development, so Incozy particularly has an extended competency framework that pertains to systems engineering. But what I'm mindful as well to point out is that there are other providers of systems thinking education out there.
mm,
For example, not least, I'll be remiss of me to not mention the Water Centre for Systems Thinking, cited in version 4 of the Incozy Handbook, which talks about systems thinking habits and what they are and how you can cultivate that. And there's a allied tool studio of free training you can access
mm,
online and things. But similarly, the uh, system complexity in organizations, there's government sponsored apprenticeships and things like that. So I try my best to be uh, as much of a complementarian as possible.
mm,
It's certainly it's a key competency for systems engineers, and I cite the development framework there, and I begin to sort of give the graded definitions. So I guess people might be inclined to read the book, have a look, understand where they think they are, and then begin to make a bit of a personal plan for, I value this as a competency. I might have a bit of a look at this and I play with the other, and I might even pick up some formal qualifications as I go. But in any case, it's there as a starter for 10 for you.
mm. Okay. And how much do you think that because I personally think that a lot of systems thinking is very natural. And it's one of those things that, you know, many years ago when I started looking at it, I just thought, well, that's obvious, isn't it? Don't we all do that? So how much of it do you think is a mindset compared to, you know, learning yet another technique?
Yeah. Yeah. So if I'll draw a comparison for a minute. So systems engineers, what we do is we kind of pull threads. We draw
Mm,
special engineering competence in. It might be an electrical engineer, a process engineer, or safety engineer, whatever. We get all these different stakeholders together and we integrate all of their interests and try and lead them through a merry dance to business mission fulfillment.
Motion detected at the
But
front door.
in the in course, what we recognize is that there are people that are, they need to be more low level analytical, and then you need people that are able to synthesize and bring people and problems and perceptions and solutions all together. And so there's a spectrum, for want of a better word, of
yeah.
the way that people think. And some of that is, as I've alluded to, I think there is a natural aspect to that. Some people are born navel gazers. Others
Mm,
are, you know, big sky, big thinkers, holistic. But again, just to dial back a little bit, I do believe that this competency area can be developed as a habit. So Water Centre, we're quite, I mean, that's the emphasis, isn't it? It's a habit, a systems thinking habit.
mm,
So let me just give you one little example of how you could develop this habit. One of the concepts I touch on in the book is about multi-scalarity, or the idea that things is always ever happening at different levels. So here's something that people potentially take away, at least, is when you're presented with a given problem or opportunity, it's right in front of you. You know, there's a loose nut, or there's a dissatisfied stakeholder, or whatever it is. We have to pause and say, well, that's the initial event. That's what we see in front of us. But we sort of stand back a level and we say, what's the pattern over time? Does this always get loose, or does this stakeholder always get agitated? Or has there been a pattern of stakeholders
mm,
becoming dissatisfied over time? And then we might look back structurally. What is it that is physically or organizationally or politically or economically that's driving that pattern of events? And
mm,
lastly, we might look at a sort of a more sort of a foundational level. What do people value in respect of this now? Does it even matter that the nut is loose, or that this stakeholder is disinterested, because they actually don't have any power or interest in our current,
mm.
they don't have a legitimate right share of claim. So there's one example of the need to think at different levels. And if anybody wants to follow up on that, obviously multi-scalarity, the iceberg model, the book touches on this, gives some more practical examples. So suffice it to say, nature, nurture, people think, do differently, but these are habits. And as you begin to engage with the world and complexity every day, just take the time to stand back and start using some of these concepts, ask different questions, be a little more systemic and systematic in all that you do.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you go about identifying which topics you're going to focus on and to which level? Because you've just been saying, well, some things you want to delve into more detail. Was there any sort of plan to that, or was that quite a natural thing as well?
It kind of oh, I don't know. I'm going to get all soft here and say, you know,
Mm,
like a stonemason,
mm,
an established stonemason, he looks at a pile of bricks or blocks or whatever and just thinks that one will go there.
yeah. Yeah.
And there's kind of probably this is a lame answer, but in my education, through my career, through the process of trying to educate and help others develop, you just come to think these things are the few things that matter most, and we should
Mm,
probably, and bearing in mind, obviously you've got the space of 55 pages or whatever, so we've only got so many spaces for blocks, you know,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
that was kind of it. I just felt it
Yeah.
through.
Just more intuitive than anything, any specific sort of
Yeah.
techniques used to do it. Okay. Yeah. And a very good question we got here is, what did you learn, if anything, from doing it? So through the process of writing, did you discover things that you didn't already know, or was it more bringing together things that you've you know that you're using on a day-to-day basis? You know, is there anything that you hadn't realized as you were writing a book that since you've gone away and looked at and is now in the book, for example? Or...
Yeah. Okay. So I think there might have been, this is a pouring out of
Mm.
what had already been assimilated.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
not sorted, but
yeah,
assimilated. So there might have been the odd resource that is cited in the book that, where I wanted to give extra oomph, whatever, to a
yeah,
point or whatever, or utility to the value to the reader. But there was nothing fundamentally that was revealed in that. I think, if anything, it was more. I'm going to get all sappy, John.
yeah,
But to say, um, we're all in our different contexts of employment and life and work and different stages of our careers and things like that, and we get the impression that that's only all that there is.
yeah,
But as part of a professional institute, to be afforded the opportunity and to be validated at the point of a proposal being accepted, I'm sure there are other people on this call and other people that listen. You've done some really amazing things. You've acquired some experience, and at the minute it's rattling around in your brain, and there's an outlet for that. And
mm.
that's why, as professionals, we not only concern ourselves with our own post nominals and all the rest of it, we try and give back. And this is an
Mm.
opportunity for you to, under the banner of Don't Panic or other, get your thoughts together, write
Mm.
something, contribute to the body of knowledge, and derive the reward that comes from that.
Yeah.
It was worth doing, and people have bought it and read it and valued it.
So in terms of the process itself, so if anybody's not familiar, essentially, someone like you, Rob, you have the idea, you put in a proposal, a couple of page proposal. We then identify 3 reviewers. They get the proposal. Then the proposal itself is reviewed and either accepted or sent back for more comments or whatever. Then you go back and write the book, and then the final draft is then reviewed, and then we go to publication. So, and you've already said a few things about this, Rob. So, how did you find if you like, the technical process of writing the book? So you
Yes.
said you found it rewarding ultimately, but was it easy to follow? Was it frustrating? Because again, everybody's different. The way that they, because of the way that people work and the way that they write, it can have a big impact on the way that the process actually runs. So
So in terms of the beginning to end, as John said, there's a pro forma that I'm sure you can be availed of, subject to interest, but nothing particularly demanding. A bit of a proposal,
yeah,
an outline, intended audience. Went through that, and as I say, the thoughts were kind of there.
yeah,
That got rubber stamped, and then it was like, oh no, they have approved it. Oh yes, it's a bit like a sort of a great. They believe in this concept, and oh no, now I've got to do it.
we called your bluff now.
Exactly. Yeah. So having called my bluff, I just, as I said, mind map, discipline, an hour
Mm.
here, a couple of hours there, and
Do you
over
write
weeks and
in?
months.
Because again, some people write, they can only write in like a day at a time. Can you like dip in and out the way that you write, or
I think I think as you've alluded to, John, more sort of like a sort of a synchronous, just a flow. Like
yeah,
for me, it kind of has to be an eat the elephant. There has
yeah,
to be a sense in which, at the end of that period, if it's an hour or 2 hours, at the end of a day or whatever it is, I have to feel that that section or that paragraph is done, whatever
mm.
that means.
Right,
So
yeah,
it's just a
yeah,
case of, it's a bit like the old days for those on the call. Do you remember when your internet would load and you'd see this pixelated image
yes,
suddenly come,
the dial-up.
yeah, the image would become clear, and that's yeah. So I was just chunk by chunk by chunk,
Yeah,
and then in terms then winding forward, I again, what membership of a professional institute will do for you, and all the rest of it, participation in local groups and things, it'll open up contact. So
yeah,
I shared a very early draft with some colleagues. They made some points, some of them on the call. So again, thanks, and the citations are there in the book. I think it's important to recognise contributions of others. That was helpful. And then we went to the formal review process. I got some feedback, very objective, helpful. There was one instance where I maybe pushed back on something. I think it was just about the placement of a particular section
mm.
in the book, but yeah, it was great. And then back to the secretariat and the publishing, and yeah, it's all worked wonderfully.
And you're pleased with the final product then?
Yeah, it's surreal. Yeah, it's surreal, isn't it? Because you spend I don't know, most of us was working in paperless environments, and
Mm.
you generate this content online, you're flicking through pages, and then it was passed to me, and yeah, was like, there it is. It's like something tactile.
Yeah.
It really has got out of my brain into a product.
There's something about holding it, isn't there? It's like, yeah, some of my books I like more than my children, to be quite honest. So, but there is something, it does always feel like having a child, doesn't it? There's just something, you know, I did that, I'm responsible for that. And it's something I very much enjoy, just seeing it there. It's a kind of reminder, isn't it, that, yeah, that's come out your head and there it is. And but I think also, as you've alluded to a couple of times, that's been accepted as well by your peers as being, you know, this is good enough to actually put out there with a professional institution's name on it to say that, and like I say, we, with these, particularly the Don't Panic, we're not looking for the definitive ultimate guide on things. We obviously, it needs to be accurate, but as you said earlier, we're looking for a bit of an opinion as well, and a bit of, well, you know, what do you think of this? So but yeah, there is something very rewarding, I personally find, about the, you know, when you open that envelope and the book's in it the first time you see it, and then obviously you go and buy 20 copies for everybody that you know, and that kind of thing. So that's fabulous. So what's next then, Rob? What can we expect from you? More Don't Panic's a bigger book, because some people, again, it's a pathway to saying, now I will write the 500-page book based on the Don't Panic. So what's next? Is there another book in you? Are there more books in you?
As I've alluded to, I have quite some demands at home. I've quite a few kids at varying stages, from just out of infancy through to the expensive process of driving lessons, the rest of it. So lots of demands at home. My role shifted a little bit into supporting the head of profession for engineering design in terms of continuous improvements, carrying forward the concepts of systems engineering, systems thinking inherent to that, to the definition of scope and delivery. I think a bit of a time just to sort of be happy that that product's landed. Obviously interested in any conversations people want to have in and around that space. Nothing immediately brewing. But
would you do it again though?
Oh yeah. I think it's a thing of, I alluded to this in the past. I think I said, if you can identify something that you're passionate about and there's a space for it, then you kind of beholden, and you've got the competency, you're beholden to do it, aren't you, really? That's the thing. My conscience is quite weak. I might find myself, and this is no promise, by the way, I might find myself in a situation where I feel I have to in the future. But right now, don't suddenly inbox me, John, with all sorts of recommendations.
We've got you now.
There we go. Yeah.
That was brilliant. So Rob, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. That was really good, really insightful. I think it's given us a good idea of what the book's all about, but also a good idea of what you're all about as well, and the way that you think and the way that your mind works. So I think it's been absolutely excellent. As I say, always a pleasure. This video will be made available on the Incozy UK YouTube channel. If anybody wants to contact Rob with questions, he's freely available. Just join him on LinkedIn or whatever. And he's at many of our events as well, our Incozy UK events. If you are interested in writing a book, do as Rob did. Send us your ideas, ring us up, have a chat, and, you know, see where we go from there. So one final time, Rob, thanks very much. It was really, really good. And I'll see you soon. Okay. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you all.